Hi everyone. I'm going to go in for a little deep dive here, talking about the empath. That's a term that's been thrown around quite a bit. I don't know what the trend has been now, how many decades, but I think there's a distinction to make. You know, there are people who are more impressionable, and those I would consider the empaths. So it's that extra added challenge that empaths have to overcome. The experience of the empath is one, okay, just to describe it, is like the person feels and senses more than what's in their own bioenergetic field. Their senses extend beyond their bioenergetic field and enmesh with their environment and enmesh with other people's bioenergetic fields. So there's many reasons why someone can develop those capacities. In childhood, depending on your upbringing, that could have been a protection mechanism, right, to discern what's in the environment. Someone who's in high alert, someone who has to really be reading on the minute cues within their environment to ensure their survival or their well-being, will develop this skill of the empath, where it's like their senses extend beyond their bioenergetic field. So you can really pick up on all these little details, right? It's a hypersensitivity. And the empath, because of this hypersensitivity, receives more data from the fields around them, more data from the environments that they're in. And how that data is received, because it's on an emotional level, the empath is emotionally based in their intelligence. It picks up impressions from the environment and impressions from people around them. So the information comes in emotionally, and it is either, depending on what clair is developed, they'll receive more information that way. But often it comes in through visual, I would say, visual impressions. And it can be clairaudient or just claircognizant, just this like knowing. And so the empath is having to navigate through this extra layer of data. And so when it comes in, it is felt, and it leaves an imprint, which is then decoded by the empath, and that's where there's different challenges and layers to move through with that. Different veils that you have to move through, right, to discern what the information is. Because when the data comes in, it's a lot of information, and you could be picking up on a feeling, having a thought come in, having an impression of something visually, some visual stimuli that comes in and leaves an image, and there's sort of like an entanglement with that. So when the empath moves through the world, they are decoding all of this information, and they are becoming more and more entangled with their environment and with the people around them. And the information coming in through the senses sort of like awakens this inner world. Like things become alive. When things are just moving through the intellect, there's a disconnection when it's not connected emotionally to the person, and things don't come alive, like stories don't come alive. And so the empath has to navigate this layer of data that comes alive within their field. and creates a whole experience because it's connected to the emotions. So, it's like a whole lifetime within a lifetime within a lifetime within these moments, right? Where you're picking up all this data and it's coming alive within your field and awakening you. And so there's an importance when it comes to protection, right? And discerning all this information. I think those are the initiations that empaths go through, is first discerning what's coming in and then detaching from it. Because if you are picking up on all this emotional energy and these impressions, that creates an entanglement that affects, your own experience, your own internal experience. So you become intrinsically connected to everyone else and what's going on at the expense of your own well-being, if it's left unchecked. So there's an element of needing to push back from receiving so much information by doing certain techniques within yourself to create a really strong auric field around you regarding the information that you want to pick up on. Because if you're left completely open to all this information, it's really easy to get lost in that. And it's also really easy to be programmed by society and by other people. Because essentially, because of this effect that, the how the empath experiences the world, if you are in that state and you just walk into an environment and then someone runs up to you and tells you something, the empath will begin to experience that as a reality because they're feeling what the person is saying on all these layers and levels. It's not just the intellect, and the physical and emotional experience is blocked out of that. It's everything together. And so even with news, right, what we see on the news, if we're looking at the internet, all of this information, this data that we can pick up extends beyond the intellect and can easily leave impressions within the empath's field. So when you're first becoming aware of this stuff, and I'm bringing this forward because yes, I am an empath. I've always been an empath. And I have to bring this information forward because I sense, because I am an empath, that someone is seeking this information that has been tugging, on my field. So this is just an example of what an empath can experience. You feel other people, right? And so you want to start to build up boundaries and protection around that visceral experience of impressions left in your field. So visualization for me has really been key, and you want to visualize what it is that you want to keep out and what it is that you want to bring in. You're always going to get impressions and you're always going to be receiving data, but it's all about creating boundaries around, to create space so that there is room left for discernment and you're not just picking up everything in your environment. If you realize that you're an empath and, you start going on the internet regularly, right? Because people don't watch TV anymore, and you're looking, through these feeds and at all this stuff, you can get easily overwhelmed by the amount of data because you're empathic and because it's more than just intellectual data. It is like emotional, visceral, temporal. It's like on all these levels, leaving an imprint on you. So you start to get into this collective. It's like you're feeling everything moving in the collective. You know, you're feeling the emotional state of every person putting out, you know, some sort of video or post out into the world, right? So if you're in that beginning stage where, you know, you realize you're completely open, you're more of an empath, you want to really pull back the reins on going onto the internet, flipping through feeds endlessly. I mean, I think that's good advice for everybody, but especially for the empath. You really have to maintain a healthy mental emotional diet with the information that's out there, because the enmeshment is really the important part that I'm trying to get across. It's, you know, the empath receives data and it leaves an emotional impression on the empath, and the emotional, our emotional core controls much of our experience. So it will affect those people more, right? It's easy to start living a reality based on the impressions of everything in the environment and everything that you're taking in, rather than living a reality based on your core soul frequencies that are emanating out through you, right? Through your nervous system, through your heart, through your core. And so it's for empath, it's a battle against, you know, the internal and the external impressions. But often, if you're in your feminine, you're going to be receiving more externally. So you want to begin to set up boundaries around you to create a strong enough container so that you're able to receive more impressions from the internal than the external, right? To be able to build that up. That's your discernment. It's like you're building up layers within yourself of discernment, of frequencies that are going to fill up your field, keep you in well-being, to then deal with what you are taking in externally. Because you're always going to feel other people. You're always going to receive these impressions, like I said, whether it's clairaudience, clairvoyance. But you want to be able to have your field push out far enough around you so that when that data comes in, it's coming in, you know, like further away from your center. If it just comes in straight into your center, you're living that experience of what it is you're taking in, or whatever story it's created, whether it's true or not, through that enmeshment. But if it comes in at a distance, it's not going to leave a lasting impression within your core. It's not going to be driving your experience. It's not going to be controlling your emotional experience in this world. So, you know, limiting what you're taking in externally while you're building up the internal is really key. And building up the internal is discerning your frequency from everything else. You have to know what your core frequency feels like. And you can use a lot of different visualizations to create like a protection around your field. That's really individual. It's up to the person, however they want to visualize it. That natural intuition towards visualizing it in a certain way will be perfect for you. And once that is built up, the other layer is, you know, the intellect and hacking away on a mental level to discern what the information is with logic and reason. So first the vibration, the frequency, this is mine, this is not mine. Then the mental layer of discerning, going through the steps of contemplating what it is that you're taking in, the data, and discerning whether it's something that is going to, there's certain things we have to take in, information about the world that isn't pleasant. So it's not about pushing away everything that isn't pleasant. It's about keeping it in that mental space enough to be able to understand it, overstand it, and then allow it to help you to evolve, right? As we're learning these greater truths, more information about what's going on in the world, without it affecting your core, because you always want to keep your core really strong. And so, so this is one of the, this has been, I think, the main issue that I experienced, over the last 4 decades, 5 decades, no, 4 decades, discerning all this stuff and learning how to work with this, with your own experience vis-a-vis who you are and how much data you pick up, versus other people. There's no comparison. Everyone's experiencing things in a different way. But if you are someone who is waking up to this and you realize you're picking up on all this data, right? And it's just and leaving these impressions in your field. It'll take you on a tangent. It'll take you over here, over there. It'll completely consume your experience. So the important part, that we have to work on is the emotional core, knowing your frequency, discerning it from other people's frequencies, like really feel into who am I? What is my core frequency? So you always know if you're out of your own seat, if you're off your throne, if you're out of alignment with yourself, right? And then the mental, that corrects a lot of the emotional impressions. And then the mental impressions can just be like, they just come in, but they don't hit your core. And those become less and less the more you extend your field. You'll receive information on the periphery. You can process that information, and then you can decide, if there's stuff you want to reject, because there's so many frequencies that are outside of the normal human spectrum of sight and of hearing, that if you're an empath, you're going to pick up on. And a lot of that is just distraction, right? It's just going to distract you, right? And picking up on other people's thoughts. We can get into telepathic connections. And because of the way that, unprotected empaths just receive that information, and it leaves impressions in their field, and it starts creating an experience for them, they have a lot of attachment. You can develop attachment issues because of that. And so doing this work allows you to be in a place of detachment, healthy detachment, and have healthy boundaries with your environment, with the people you're interacting with, and to eventually get to the place where you can turn that on and off, right? It's always going to be a part of you. It's something that you learned to ride a bike. You can always ride a bike, but the importance is being able to have control of your experience, to the largest extent possible, so that you can function in the world, so that you can be healthy, and you can do what you came here to do. You can care for yourself and care for others in your environment, and not get distracted, and have, even that energy sort of be siphoned off into all these directions. Because, it's easy to lose yourself in, for example, you spend a couple hours on the internet, and it's like all of a sudden you have all these impressions within you, and your energy is just sparsed out everywhere, right? And that kind of ties into what they call loosh harvesting and stuff like that. But you don't want your emotional energy to be leaking anywhere. It is healthy to have a certain amount of attachment to your environment, to the people around you, but really just like with discernment, because when you are emotionally, when you allow a certain emotional impressions to come in through the people around you, you can navigate what it is that you need to do in order to increase the well-being of your environment, increase the well-being of those around you, while maintaining your core intelligence and your core stability, right? So if people go into complete detachment and no empathic connection, and it just gets too intellectualized, that moves into the direction of sociopath and psychopath, right? They just don't feel anybody around them. So if they don't feel anybody around them at all, then they don't, it's not within their experience to take any of that data into consideration, right? How their actions will affect another. So there is a certain amount of empathy that is necessary. But if you're over empathic, then it has the same effect. It goes in, completely in the opposite direction. And then the person starts lashing out at the world, at people around them, because they're so intrinsically connected to everyone. And it's just they're feeling so deeply, and it creates this emotional response that is exaggerated and over the top. So it's about finding that balanced state with how much data, we're picking up on in the field. And we can go all the way back to the, the ancient times and all these different movies and classics that describe, the oracle. And the oracle is just, they're complete empaths, like at 100%. So they're just like these, open beings, receiving. They don't have a life. They can't really do anything. People have to feed them. People have to take care of them because they're incapacitated in the world. Because when you receive too much information, you just can't function. So it's, and then on the opposite end of the spectrum, tyrannical rulers who just don't feel anything. They've completely blocked out everything and everyone as they've grabbed for power. They've sold their soul over time, selling out that connection, that emotional connection, the emotional nature to the divine, and to, I'd say, the divine feminine, to the point where they hoard a bunch of power, but they have no empathic connection to the world and the people around them. So they start, placing profit over people, and start doing things, selling themselves out, for status or opportunities, or money. And by the time, they eventually get all these things, that they have no emotional connection to themselves anymore. And that's the opposite end. Right? And then they basically lose that capacity to soul. They lose the capacity to communicate with their soul. So you have these two opposite extremes, and we're bringing it back into, again, the center, right? And finding balance with what is healthy and unhealthy regarding how much empathy we should have with the world and with the environment around us. And also really being aware of the impressions that an empath can receive from their environment and from people, and pulling back the reins on how much they're going to let those impressions control their experience. This is because a lot of, it's hard to explain, but an empath starts interacting with someone, and that person, they're receiving all this information about that person, right? We could talk about relationships too, and why it's difficult. The unhealthy empath gets into these relationships. They're receiving so much data and so many impressions that the enmeshment becomes really strong, and the impressions that that they're picking up on, that are left within their field, these imprints, are so real because they're emotional and they are visceral. It's like a lived experience, right? So then you get into an argument with your partner, whatever relationship, and it's like you're feeling it on this visceral level. Okay, that's unhealthy. It shouldn't be that way, right? Because then it is impossible to co-create things. It is impossible to work with people and have it within this healthy, reciprocative kind of state, and being productive when you're receiving too many impressions and there's too much entanglement. Because then the person's going to say something and it's going to be like this whole experience, right? With a visual attached to it, an emotional train attached to it, and all this stuff. So it becomes complicated, So in order to simplify that process and allow empaths, which actually it's a gift, to be empathic, but it has to be managed and it has to be used wisely. So that you're not ripped apart from within, and so that you don't rip apart the relationships without. So again, it's about building boundaries, knowing your core frequency, building boundaries, setting up the visual protection, and the visual boundaries within yourself to build up those healthy walls, those healthy filters that allow your bioenergy, it's like programming your bioenergetic field to filter this information for you. You could trust yourself that if you set up these energetic fields around you, it will filter the information for you so that by the time you receive the actual message of whatever it is that's being communicated, it comes in clear and it's not convoluted, right? It's not mixed up with all this emotional energy. It comes in as a clear message, and you can see really clearly the other person's needs, what it is they're trying to accomplish with you, and vice versa. So I'd say work on that stuff for those that have been tuning in and really asking a lot of questions about this and the nature of being someone who lives in this way with the right brain and the left brain activated, and everything is an experience in itself. And also just be aware that other people don't experience things in that way, right? There's plenty of people that don't have that empathic nature activated within their experience. So everything just kind of really bounces right off their field. They're not going to feel anything, and they're not going to have any emotional impressions left within them when you're communicating with them. So there's no enmeshment, there's no attachment on that level. So knowing yourself allows you to know others, right? And you can discern, this is me, this isn't me, and not everyone is having the same experience. So I can't place my experience of life and see everyone else through that lens, because everybody is experiencing things in different ways, life in a different way, and depending on what has come online for them, it's going to be different challenges for them of how that information gets filtered through. So I'd say work on all that stuff. I do have a video out on how to find your core frequency, but it's really you got to go in and you got to feel it. You got to sit with yourself, and you have to really discern what is my core frequency, so that you always know when you're off center, and you always know when your core frequency, your soul, who you are, is being influenced or affected by your environment or whatever, the collective people around you, so that you can always return to that, because once you know it, you can always return to it. And then, that's like your meditative space. That's you, that's who you are, and that is a space of well-being, of health, of vibrancy, and that's where you can rejuvenate, and that's where you can also create the best from. The other way, where everything's enmeshed and your field is enmeshed with the environment, your field is enmeshed with the people around you, to the extent where their emotional state is your emotional state, and you're just you're so impressionable. That's the chaotic way of navigating through things. So it's a very chaotic path, and you're going to get pulled in many different directions. And so, in order to really come here to do what it is you're meant to do, because everyone has a specific energy, mission, something that they want to share with the world, that they want to leave with the world, that's going to help the world progress. You have to be able to know your frequency, know when you're at it, and always, know when you're out of that frequency, and be able to snap back into it and maintain that for prolonged periods, so that you can really begin to create and develop that thing, develop those skills in a long-term fashion. So I'm going to leave it at that. I know that it was a bit repetitive, but I really wanted to kind of just stamp in, get that information out there. And I hope that helps. All right, take care. You can reach me at inspiringplayfulevolution.com.